Hello everybody. So, you want to learn how to write sheet music? Well, as a college graduate with a degree in music theory and composition, I think I might be able to help you out with that. Now, this video might be a little bit long, but hopefully that's because I have a lot of good information for you and not because I'm still new to this whole YouTube thing, so let's hope it's the former on that one. So if you find this video helpful, go ahead and click that like button down below and subscribe so you never miss another video, and click the bell so you get notified when the next video goes up. So let's go and hop on into how to read sheet music. So I'm going to make the assumption that you all know nothing about music. So because of that, I've split this video up into 10 different sections that was going to build from the foundation all the way up to more relatively advanced aspects of music that should get you started in learning how to read it. And before we get started, music is often said to be a language, and languages have rules and structure. So basically these 10 aspects are going to be explaining those rules and structures. So let's go and get started with the very first aspect, and that is the staff, the stave, the staves, or the staves. Now the staff is simply those 5 lines and 4 spaces that you see right here on the screen. These lines and spaces is where when you'd want to place a note or when you'd read a note, they'd be placed in one of these lines or in one of these spaces. If you were to put 2 of these staves together, bracket them together like so, this is what is called the grand staff, and this is what we're using for the majority of the video. Also, if you play piano or any other instrument like the piano, you are likely to see the grand staff in all of your music. So one more aspect that I'll mention is that when a note is placed on the staff, the higher on the staff that it's placed is the higher pitch of a note it is, while it's vice versa for if you go low, that is going to be a lower pitch. And there is one more aspect to a staff that I'm going to mention right now, and that is what's called a ledger line. Now, what a ledger line is, it's an extra line that is placed above or below the staff, depending on if the note is too high or too low to fit, that you then put the note head onto. So for now, just know that they exist, and you can go beyond the 5 lines and 4 spaces. And so the next concept we'll talk about is the time signature. The time signature is that fraction right there on the left, that 4/4. This is the most common time signature that you will actually ever see. All this refers to is how to organize the music and where, how, when to set the pulse. The top number, or 4 in this case, represents how many beats are in each measure, while the bottom number, again, in this case 4, represents which type of note will get that beat, in this case, the quarter note. Now 4/4 is actually so common that in a lot of music, it is actually replaced with just a C, referring to common time. So if you're reading music and you happen to just see a C in place of where the time signature should be, this just tells you 4/4, it's common time. And there are many, many different types of time signatures. For example, there's 2/4, 3/4, 6/4, 6/8. There can be a time signature for literally anything. Just know that the main thing to take away from this section is that that top number will let you know how many beats are in each measure, while that bottom number will let you know which note gets that beat. And for the sake of this video, for the rest of it, we are just going to use 4/4 or that common time. Next is going to be a relatively simple concept compared to everything else, and that is a measure and bar lines. A measure or a bar line is simply that vertical little line that you see repeatedly throughout a line of music. And the measure's job is to help organize the music alongside the time signature. And measures can also help be a form of a checkpoint. When in a rehearsal, your conductor might ask you to start at measure 42, and every single player will be able to find measure 42 and start at the exact same place confidently every single time. And the last thing I'll mention about measures and bar lines is what's called the double bar line. The double bar line is most commonly used to inform a player when a piece ends. So the next thing we'll talk about is a clef. If you look at right next to the time signature, you'll notice those funky looking symbols. Those are our clefs. There are a few different types of clefs, but for the sake of this video, we'll keep it to just these 2. That one that winds around itself, that is our treble clef, while the one that looks like an ear or a backwards C with the 2 dots, that is our bass clef. Now the role of the clef is to reference a specific pitch. However, to make this a little bit easier, we're going to talk about a different pitch to start with, and that is middle C. Now if we take the idea of the ledger line and we put one ledger line in between the 2 staves, we will be able to place a singular note, and this is our middle C. Now middle C is really important because it actually is the center point between the 2 staves. If we were to go any higher, we'd be going into the treble clef. If we were to be going any lower, we'd actually be going into the bass clef. Middle C is not anymore in the treble clef as it is in the bass clef. Now, going into what the two clefs are actually going to be referencing, the treble clef has this little circle here. That circle will always be around the second line from the bottom. This will always be referencing that G right above middle C. Whereas the bass clef, those two dots will always be around the second line from the top. This will always reference the F below middle C. All right, the next concept is probably gonna be the most difficult one in this entire video, and that is a key signature. The key signature shows up in between our clef and our time signature. Now, within any key, there are a specific set of pitches that differ in order and appearance, and they differ depending on which key that you are in. And each key signature is made up of sharps or flats, and we'll get more in depth of what those are later on when we talk about accidentals. Another way to explain a key signature is that they will inform the reader which notes are altered throughout the piece. And each key signature has multiple names, mainly two, a major or a minor. For the sake of this video, we'll mostly be using a blank key signature. This is no sharps or no flats, and this is either our C major or our A minor key. If we were to have one sharp in our key signature, this would be referencing a G major or an E minor key. And if we were to have one flat, we would have an F major or a D minor key. Now, what the sharps and flats do, just a little precursor to when we get to accidentals, is that they will slightly raise or lower, sharps raise, flats lower, a specific pitch. Another quick thing to mention is that there is a specific order that you have to add the sharps or flats in. If we were to have one sharp in the key signature, the F has to be sharp. If we add another sharp to the key signature, it would have to be C, then G, then D, then A, then E, and then lastly B. And if you want to know the order for the flats, it's actually the same notes, just reversed. B, E, A, D, G, C, F. That is the order from you adding one flat with B flats all the way to the seventh flat, which is an F flat. Now, it's kind of stupid, but the way that I've always remembered the order for this is just to know the flat order as BEAD, greatest common factor. That is how my college taught me. It's really dumb, but it works. And then for sharps, you just reverse it. All right, now we're in the last half of these concepts, and now we're actually gonna get started with putting some notes on the page with talking about rhythm. Rhythm is the placement of notes within each measure. There is a rhythm of when to play when you put a note in the music, or there's a rhythm of when not to play when we put a rest in the music. For every type of note, there is a type of rest that corresponds with that note. Now, to help make this a lot more simple to look at, I made the bass clef of this entire example all quarter notes, so that way you should be able to see a little easier how the whole measure is divided up. Now, again, if you're good at fractions, this will likely come fairly easy to you. So remember, our time signature is 4/4, and that in between each measure we should have 4 beats. Since the quarter note gets the beat in a 4/4 time signature, we should have 4 quarter notes, and as you can see, we do have 4 quarter notes in each measure. So let's go and run down the list of what each type of note looks like that you will most commonly see. Starting with, well, the quarter note. This is what a quarter note looks like. It gets the pulse, and when you turn on a metronome at 4/4 time signature, this is what each click will end up being. Now, moving on to what this guy is, this is the 8th note. An 8th note is characterized by its little flag, as well as if it's paired with another 8th note, it will be beamed together from right there at the top. An 8th note gets half the length of a quarter note. Before we go any further, let's go in and talk about the rests for the quarter note and the 8th note. This is a quarter rest. This little squiggly looking guy. This gets the exact same duration as a quarter note, however, you're not supposed to play. And this little funky looking 7 is an 8th rest. Again, same thing. It's the value of an 8th note, except you don't play. Now, moving on into another couple types of notes. A hollowed out looking quarter note is a half note. Again, half is twice as length of a quarter, so it gets twice the duration of a quarter note. This is our whole note. You can guess by its name, it takes up the whole measure with a full 4 beats. And then if we look at these two types of rests, this might get a little confusing, so this might take a little bit of time to differentiate them. The bar that goes on top of a line, this is a half rest. This gives the same duration as a whole note, however, again, you don't play. Whereas if you look at the bar that appears underneath a line, this is a whole rest. An easy way that I tend to remember this when I was a kid was a whole rest is that you dig a hole, and so it's underneath the line. Now, one last thing I'll bring up when it comes to rhythm is a dot. What a dot does is that it adds 50% of the length of the note that it is attached to. So let's take, for example, our half note. If we were to attach a dot to it to create a dotted half note, this would create a note with 3 beats. This is because we'll have our half note normally with 2 beats, and then the dot will add 50% of the original duration, and this can be used for any type of note. Now, the next concept is pitch. Pitches are literally the notes that have a higher or lower frequency that sound high or sound really low. Now, referring back to our grand staff, we'll remember that this is, again, middle C. What you see on screen is actually a C major scale. The C major scale is composed of notes C, D, E, F, G, and before we go on to the next note, I want to ask you a question. What is the next note called? Is it option 1, H, option 2, A, option 3, C, or option 4, this is way too much information, I cannot handle it, please, for the love of God, stop talking. If you chose option 2, A, you are correct. There is actually no pitch class H. Now, when I say pitch class, all that's referring to is the pitches that share the letter. For example, the bottom and the top of this scale are both C. They are in the same pitch class. They are both called C. However, they are at different octaves, so they are different pitches. But since they're both called C, they're the same pitch class. Now, for fun, if you want to know what the top line of a grand staff and the bottom line of the grand staff notes are, the top line of the grand staff in the treble clef is an F, while the bottom line in a grand staff in that bass clef is a G. Remember how I said back in key signatures that we'll talk about what a sharp and a flat is when we get to accidentals? Well, here we are with accidentals. And this is also going to play on the idea that we just talked about with pitches. So, to reiterate, a sharp will slightly raise a note's pitch, while a flat will slightly lower a note's pitch. So if we were to add a sharp to an F, it will be called an F sharp. It is not the same as an F, and if we were to add a flat to, say, an E, this would create an E flat. Again, an E flat is not an E. They're different pitches entirely. Now, how much do they raise or lower a pitch? Well, they both move the same amount, and that amount is called a semitone or a half step. Or if you have a piano or a guitar near you, a sharp will move the note up a single key on the piano, a flat will lower it a single key, or on a guitar, a sharp will raise it to the next fret or lower it to the fret below. Now, the next type of accidental is called the natural. Now, the natural is a little gimmicky because it will actually negate sharps or flats. And these can commonly show up when we have a key signature that already has sharps or flats in it. Let's go ahead and use that G major single sharp key signature. If we were to write, say, a normal line of music that uses the F sharps, since we have the key signature in place, the Fs are automatically assumed to be sharped. So we might read this with no accidental, because there actually is no accidental. The key signature tells us that every pitch that shows up as an F on the staff will be played as an F sharp. However, if we were to add this little guy, this will make every F sharp an F natural, moving it back onto that white key or just reverting its alteration. We are altering it by de-altering it, if that makes any sense. That's what a natural does. Another aspect to an accidental is that within a singular measure, say you have multiple Fs in this measure, and we're still in that key of F sharp. So these are actually all F sharps. Let's say that second one actually has a natural added to it. That would make all remaining F sharps in this measure automatically F naturals. That first F is sharped, it is an F sharp. However, since this F is naturalized, this F sharp is now naturalized to an F natural, every following F sharp is also naturalized for just the duration of the measure. When the next measure starts back up, things are reverted back to the original key signature. Just in case that was a little confusing, just know that within a singular measure, after an accidental is introduced, any repeated pitch class that was affected by that accidental keeps the accidental even if it doesn't explicitly say it does, until the measure ends and the next measure starts, and then everything's reverted back to whatever your key signature is. Now, there is such thing as a double sharp and a double flat, and just as their names might imply, they will do twice as much alteration to your note as a normal sharp or flat will do. So that's a whole step, that's a whole tone, that's 2 keys up on your piano or down on your piano, or 2 frets up on your guitar or 2 frets down on your guitar. All right, we're almost there. We only have 2 more topics left, and the second to last one is actually pretty short. This is our tempo. Now, the tempo, again, is very simple. It's how fast your piece is going to be played. If you look at the beginning of our piece and you see this quarter note equals number, this number is our BPM, or beats per minute. So, since we're in 4/4, whatever this number is how many quarter notes we will hear within a minute. Now, the tempo can increase or decrease within the piece, as by use of an accelerando to speed it up, or there's 2 names to slow one down. There is a ritardando or a rallentando. Both are fairly common, though I will say retardando is a bit more common than a rallentando. Both mean the exact same thing. And then if you were to return to that original tempo, there are 2 ways that you will more commonly see that printed. The most common way to see that printed is a tempo, while the lesser common way, but still shows up from time to time, is called tempo primo. And look at that, we're on our last concept. Look how far we've come. And this is a fun one. This is dynamics. I just noticed how dark my room got because I'm filming this in the evening. So dynamics are simple. How loud or how softly should you play? So if you were to play softly, we would look at this P, which represents piano. Not the instrument. Piano is the name for the dynamic if you want to play soft. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there is F, which stands for forte, which means loud. So if you see an F under your music, that means the composer wants you to play loud. Now, what does this MP and this MF stand for? Now, P and F still stand for piano and forte, and the M is the same in both. Well, the M stands for mezzo, which means medium. So this means medium soft for mezzo piano and medium loud for mezzo forte. Now, mezzo forte, medium loud, can be implied to mean a little softer than a forte. However, does a mezzo piano mean that you should play louder than a piano or softer than piano? If you thought that it is actually a little bit louder than piano, well, you're right. Mezzo piano is actually medium soft, so you don't go as soft. So mezzo piano is louder than a piano, however, a mezzo forte is not as loud as a forte. But mezzo forte and mezzo piano are not the exact same dynamic. There are different dynamics in themselves. And since this all kind of scales upon each other, how do you know how loud each of these are? If you were to play at a normal volume, you're not trying to play too loud, you're not trying to play too soft, you're trying to kind of play at your Goldilocks comfortable volume, this most commonly is referred to as a mezzo forte. And then there's 2 other things I will add on when it comes to dynamics, and that is a crescendo or a decrescendo. A crescendo is simply getting louder gradually over time. Say you have a piano, then crescendos up to a forte, as opposed to playing this entire line of music all really quietly and then suddenly becoming very loud. You might want to gradually build yourself up to that point. That's what a crescendo will provide for you. Well, a decrescendo, as you might guess by the implication, does the opposite. What if you're playing very loud and you want to get softly, but you don't want to just get soft immediately? You can decrescendo or diminuendo, means the exact same thing. And that's it for this video. Now, hopefully I didn't lose too many of you with that, because this can be a bit confusing when you're first starting out. This was the minimum amount of information that I believe was truly necessary for you to learn to read and write sheet music. And there are a lot more aspects that I have actually purposefully left out to try not to give you all too much information too quickly. And so with that being said, I highly encourage you to go out to your local music shop and buying a beginner piano book or a beginner guitar book, whatever instrument you have, and get started on your musical journey. This video, I hope, helps out a lot of you, and if it did, go ahead and click the like button down below and subscribe so you never miss a video that goes up. Make sure to click that bell so you always get notified when that video goes up. And with all that being said, have a very lovely day.